Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Claire Fordham. I'm one of the professional advisors at the CSP and I lead on support worker development. Steph, you've just been hearing from, and we've got Steve and Christy with us, who are both very experienced physiotherapy assistant practitioners, support workers out working in practice, and our support worker reference group. So what I want to do at this point is just bring in Steve and Christy, who are physiotherapy support workers, members of the CSP. And what Steve and Christy are going to do is just a couple of minutes, just describe their background and their experience, the role that they're currently working in, and the things that they typically undertake in their role in terms of some of the tasks and responsibilities. And then we're going to have a little think about what that means in terms of the scope of their practice, how they're able to work, and what it is that's important in terms of their capability for them to work safely and effectively in their role. So which one of you am I going to put on the spot first? Who wants to go first, Steve or Christy?
So my name's Christy Devon. I am a therapy assistant practitioner at Peterborough City Hospital. We work quite differently at Peterborough City Hospital because we cover both specialities, both physio and occupational therapy. I was in admin right up until I came to the trust in 2009, where I decided that I needed a career change. I came to the trust as a secretary for the professional leads, both OT and physio. I worked 4 long days in the secretary office. And then on my non-working day and at weekends, I got my ward experience. I self-funded my NVQ, and then eventually went full-time in the role. Normally, I work in outpatients and do a little bit of ward work, but it's predominantly pulmonary rehabilitation that I run with a band 6 rotational physio. But since the COVID has started, I have been redeployed to the wards full time. I'm on the cardiac ward at the moment. And today, just to give you an example of my day, there were no qualifieds in on my ward. It was me and 2 other support workers. I have covered the whiteboard meeting, which is an MDT meeting with consultants, the ward manager, the pharmacist. So I've done all that today. Challenged discharge plans, put in supports for patients, done assessment mobilities, kitchens, all sorts of things. So yeah, that's me at the moment.
Thank you, Christy. So some of the things that Christy's described that she's done today, particularly with no registered physiotherapist being on her ward, just again, give us a sense, stick in the chat, how many of you feel surprised by that? How many of you had a moment where you thought, oh, I'm not sure that she should have been doing that? Or how many of you think, yeah, that sounds absolutely spot on. That's what I would expect somebody in a higher level support worker role. So band 4, Christy, aren't you? Yeah, that's what you would expect. So have a think about that, what you felt about what Christy was saying and how she described her day, and just kind of stick some things in the chat. Yeah, so Helen's saying, yeah, that all sounds okay. If they're confident in their role, okay, only confidence? No, that's brilliant, thank you. Anyone else put something in? It's really helpful for us to kind of engage with you in a bit of dialogue if you stick a few things in the chat. Great, so Steve, can you do similarly, please, and just kind of let us know a bit about your background, your qualifications, your experience, and maybe a bit like Christy, kind of give us a flavour of what your typical day today has been.
My name's Steve Robertson. I'm band 4 PTI in acute respiratory. I've been quite fortunate. I've run 2 careers over a period of about 30 years. one in and out of the NHS and the other within the fitness industry. Within the fitness industry, I'm a level 4 PT, and I specialise in rehab and human biomechanics. I teach in HIIT training, circuit, spin, martial arts, and also Qigong. I run my own businesses, a personal training studio, and also a fitness education company. So I've employed people. I've had 5 full-time employees and about 250 freelance instructors teaching fitness programs that I've developed throughout the country. I'm also a co-author of a book. I used to write for regional and national newspapers on health and fitness and things like that. Within the NHS, I've been in and out for about 20 years, starting out as a healthcare assistant within ICU and HDU, and then moved into mental health physiotherapy as a support worker within the community. Worked in minor injuries, pulmonary rehab and community respiratory. My current role, as I say, is with acute respiratory. I'm currently a steward for the CSP as well, and a member of the SWRG as an associate member as well. So yeah, I've been quite varied in my jobs, but they've all seemed to crisscross. Daily routines, it ranges from anything from morning handovers with the MDTs, looking at discharges and discharge planning, looking at rehabilitation for step-down patients from ICU, especially with COVID at the moment, assessments, social histories, working alongside OTs on assessments, as well as developing workshops for other support workers, supervising other support workers in their roles, and yeah, lots of bits and pieces. I'm just sort of touching on bits and pieces that we do at the moment, but on an overall, that's roughly what we do on a day-to-day.
Brilliant, thank you, Steve. So I think what Steve and Christy have described there is not just the tasks and responsibilities and competencies they have, but what they've actually described is a range of what we call capability to work at the level of practice that they work at, which then means they can work within the full scope of a role. So some of the questions that came up on the chat was, well, what's the difference in the scope of roles between, for example, Band 2, Band 3, Band 4? And I'm going to go over that for you in a little while. And I'm going to signpost you to a resource where we have that clarified. But one of the things that I'm really keen in terms of myths to get over tonight is that support workers don't work to a list of competencies and tasks and responsibilities. There are tasks and responsibilities in their roles, and there are competencies that they need to obviously fulfill to be competent in the tasks and responsibilities that they undertake to work safely and effectively. But that does not define support worker practice. It is capability in a role to fulfill what's needed in that role, and the whole broad range of skills and knowledge that they bring into a role that then enable them to undertake whatever it is that is appropriate for them to undertake within the scope of that role, and that will come a bit clearer when we talk about, well, what does top of scope of a role look like in sort of 3, and then I'm going to challenge you to think of a further level of practice. But what I want to do now is show you a very new video which we've had made for us to show actually what a couple of support workers in a Liverpool trust have been doing during COVID. And again, in this video, the purpose for showing you this video is, again, to just challenge your thinking a little bit about what you see and what you hear in terms of the scope of the support worker role. So look carefully at what they're doing, and also look carefully, for example, at job titles, etc. And then we'll have a look, see what you think about that. Okay, so I hope you enjoy this, everyone.
The pandemic has been very busy, very changeable, quite stressful at times. We've needed to all pull together and all stand up and be counted. So our therapy team has worked really hard to make sure that we're supporting one another. The contribution of support workers actually makes me quite emotional, because they have been vital to the response and to supporting these patients, you know, right from sitting with somebody while they sadly passed away up to being the one that walked them out the door when they've been discharged home safely. If they're given the skills and the facility and the support, then they can do massive things.
Faye is a Band 4 support worker working within physiotherapy. She's helped do the triage on the wards, sorting out who needs seeing and how urgent then patients are to be seen. She's helped buddy with nurse staff on the wards and on ITU, and also the physiotherapy workforce. She has helped orientate new staff and staff that have been redeployed to our department. What it has done is enabled the patients to be seen several times a day, just opposed to once a day. I'd say 90% of the patients that we rehabbed actually walked out of this hospital, and I don't think the outcome would have been as good without the support workers.
I think in the next few months the spotlight's really going to shift into community rehabilitation, not just for COVID patients but for everyone who may have missed out on any therapy input over the last few months. So I think we really need to focus now on developing and expanding and facilitating support worker roles within the community in order for us to be able to get through all the patients that are going to need our input.
So I hope you enjoyed that. That would have been the first time that Steve and Christy have seen that. It's a powerful film, isn't it? So what I want you to do now is just, again, put in the chat for us, what did you see there that Faye was doing that perhaps surprised you about a support worker that might be doing something, about what Paula described that Faye was doing as a typical part of her day, and then anybody spot anything about Paula? So when Paula was speaking on the video, anybody spot anything about Paula's, the title of Paula's role and what we saw Paula doing in the video? Yeah, so we saw Faye listening to someone's chest. And the reason I'm really glad you spotted that is because when we think of support worker practice in terms of a set of tasks that you either can do or you can't do. So this list of tasks is only for the registered physios, and this list of tasks is only for support workers. It's a complete myth. The tasks and responsibilities that somebody undertakes, it's determined by what the scope of your role is, what the capabilities you need in that scope of a role, and what that then enables you to do in terms of your authority to act based on the extent of risk, uncertainty, and complexity in a situation. So it's really what I really want you to take away from tonight is that there is no list, and you might find this challenging in practice because there are still people out there that believe work is allocated via a list, but there is no list about what somebody can do and what they can't do. It is all about what level of practice are people at, and that is based on what is needed in terms of your knowledge, skills and competencies to meet a patient needs in a situation that is determined on risk, complexity and uncertainty. So what is clear is that when we are working with patients where not necessarily the patient, but when the intervention and decisions about the intervention are high risk, uncertain or unpredictable, you need a level of practice which enables you to critically reason at a higher level in order to make a safe and appropriate decision. And that is about the interventions and the situation, not necessarily the patient, because you can actually have a highly complex patient, but the interventions that can be delegated might be those that can be protocol-led, are reasonably straightforward, and even though the patient may be very complex, it may be a task or responsibility that can be delegated to a support worker. So it's really, really important to know that. I'm just going to scroll up in the chat a bit before I read that lovely comment there. So well spotted, those of you that saw Paula had got technical instructor on her t-shirt, and Helen, well spotted, Paula's band. So did you see that Paula is a band 5 physiotherapy support worker, and you may be a bit surprised by that, but you may not be quite surprised by that now that you've kind of understood a little bit about what I've said about capabilities, because the other myth around support worker practice is that there is this kind of glass ceiling at band 4. That is not correct. The reason that we believe or people understand that there could be this glass ceiling for the non-registered workforce, so support workers, is because when you have a professional registration and you start in the NHS, you start at a band 5. And it is the scoring of that level of your professional registration that pushes the points that you need to get a role into a certain band into that band 5. But what also pushes up points into how then your role is determined and what band it sits at is the level of responsibility you have, the level of additional responsibilities you have, and again, how much freedom to act you have. So Paula is a band 5, not just because of her level of clinical capability, but also because she has additional responsibilities in her role. She teaches and trains and mentors the entire physiotherapy support workforce in her organisation, and you saw her there engaging in teaching and training and mentoring. And that's an additional responsibility for Paula in a support worker role. And then when that is put through a local grading system, that role came out as a band 5, and that's why Paula is a band 5. So I'm going to scroll down now to, is that Tyler, I think. So nice explanation about capabilities and level of practice of our brilliant support workers. That's good, we like to hear that. Never thought about it like that. I'm working alongside some amazing TIs in practice. I continue to learn so much from them as a registered qualified physiotherapist. And that is absolutely key. And I'm going to go on a little bit now to talk about capabilities a little bit more, and scope of practice a little bit more at different levels of practice, and then also talk about what it is in terms of capability of the support workforce that means that they are an amazing resource for you to learn from. So I'm going to go back to my slides. This slide here, this shows you the domains of capability, not just for support workers, but for the entire physiotherapy profession. And these capabilities, these domains, there are different levels of capabilities with all of these domains. And where you're at a certain level of practice will depend on a number of things. It will depend on the qualifications you've got, not just a pre-registration physiotherapy degree, but other qualifications you have. It will depend on your experience. and it will depend on any other education and development and training that you've undertaken. So, for example, if we think about skills, for example, so one of the levels of practice in skills will be around communication. So if you think of, let's take Christy and Steve, and think about actually what we were hearing about in terms of their background and experience, suffice to say that Steve and Christy will have really highly developed communication skills. And it is highly likely that actually their mastery of communication skills may well be some of the best in the team that they're sitting in. So with the Band 5s, Band 6, Band 7s and managers, it may be actually that it's Steve and Christie's longevity of practice with patients and in healthcare. It's their other life experiences that mean actually they might have some of the highest communication skills in the team, and therefore they are a great individual to watch, to listen to, and to learn from, and you will gain masses from working alongside support workers on placement, for example, around communication skills. Similarly, knowledge and understanding, they will have high levels of technical competence within the scope of their role. So the things that they do regularly and that they practice regularly, they will be at a level of practice that as a student will be higher than the level of practice that you are coming in on placement. So there is a huge amount of technical competence you can learn from them as well. In terms of quality care and patient-centered practice, again, they've been in practice a long while. They've worked with many, many patients. They will have great person-centered practice skills. They will display high quality patient care. So there is an awful lot you can learn from them. Researching, evaluating and leading in practice. Steve, can I just bring you in here? Can you just share with everybody what you were doing at the beginning of COVID? In terms of when you got people redeployed to your area?
Basically, there was obviously our team leads were deployed to ICU, which basically left me to take the role of the daily runnings of the acute respiratory ward. We had redeployment of community physios coming into the hospital, but obviously they didn't know the hospital setting, they didn't know how the ward was run, they didn't know where things were, they didn't know, there was lots of questions that they need those guys through the daily runnings of that ward, and how we actually work with the patients on the ward on a day-to-day basis, and obviously our step downs as well, and it was just basically giving them a lot of support as well as running the department, the ward, if you like, myself, prioritising the patients, as in P1s, P2s, etc., and yeah, literally running around the different wards that were under our scope as well. So I wasn't just based on one ward, I was based on three wards. So I had a patient load of approximately 15 patients throughout the day, and a lot of those were step downs from or COVID patients in the early days.
Brilliant, thank you, Steve. So what Steve was sharing there when we were talking about actually there's a domain of capability that's around leading. Again, leadership is not about your job title or the banding you are. All of us are expected to lead, and if you have the capabilities to lead and your support workforce do have the capability to lead, many of them have the capability to lead in the scope of their roles, then we should absolutely should be making sure people do that. So let's have a think about scope of practice. I'm going to just try and get my slides back again. So what I would point you all to is this fantastic resource that we have, which is available on the website, and we'll get this sent out to you afterwards. It's called Optimising Capability in the Support Workforce, and what we do in that resource is outline what we see as 3 and then an additional level of capability. And in a nutshell, if you are to make things really easy and clear for you, as you go higher up in the banding, you have more autonomy with what you are able to do within the context of somebody making a decision to delegate work to you. And we're going to come on in a minute to accountability, responsibility, and delegation. So within the scope of practice, broadly speaking, at band 2, the scope of practice of a band 2 is an individual who works with quite close supervision. All of their work is delegated to them in terms of specific tasks, quite straightforward work, and much more around almost kind of supporting, looking after patients and supporting care of patients. We don't generally see too many band 2 physiotherapy support workers in practice anymore, because actually we require the physiotherapy support workforce to work at a higher level than that. We need them to work at a higher level. So we're seeing fewer and fewer band 2s. At band 3, and band 3 might be the role that most of you see, at band 3, band 3s work within a level of practice where they have perhaps distant supervision. So it may be that they're just kind of reporting in and out to somebody at the end of the day. They know very clearly that their work is delivering a treatment plan that has already been set by registered physiotherapists, and then they're being asked to deliver elements of that treatment plan which they can deliver autonomously. And again, it's not about the tasks, this task or that task that's written on a list. It's about a scope of practice being that it is delivering a straightforward treatment plan to a patient that has already been seen by a registered physiotherapist. When we get to the higher level, which is band 4 and above, as we saw with Paula, again, because of level of capability and the level of knowledge, skill that an individual has at that level of practice and competence, they can be delegated actually whole caseloads of patients. They can be delegated key responsibilities like screening patients on a ward, certain cohorts of patients, and they can be delegated a whole pathway of care for certain groups of patients. Generally, those for whom care, even though the patient themselves might be complex, but actually their care plan, their treatment plan, might be reasonably straightforward and familiar to that individual. And they might work with what we call quite distant supervision. So, for example, if you've got a band 4 in the community, their supervision, their delegation and their reporting in and out might actually just be on the phone at the end of the day to somebody or the beginning of the day, but they're very clear about what their caseload is, what their work that's delegated to them is. And what's really key is that the registered physiotherapist or any other healthcare professional delegating to them has a really good understanding of what they're capable and competent and confident to undertake. Hopefully what you've really got out of this so far is that it's not about lists of do's and don'ts. It's about what's the level of capability and what can safely be delegated. So Kathy said, how is it decided what scope is appropriate? Great question. It is decided by what does the patient need? What is the level of knowledge, skill, competence, level of critical and clinical reasoning required that that patient needs. And that's how you decide, actually, is this a band 7 that needs to see a patient? Is it a band 6? Is it a 5? Is it a 4? Is it a 3? Is it a 2? So it's about the level of risk, the level of uncertainty and unpredictability of a situation that makes you think, who is the right person with the right scope of practice to meet that patient's needs?
Hi, sorry, Kathy. Hi. To also sort of reiterate that question, the answer to your question was, within acute respiratory, the things that I would not be able to do unsupervised, and I can only work with a band 6 and above, would be things like aerosol procedures, things like deep suctioning, cough assist, that sort of thing. I can work alongside a registered, but obviously I can't undertake those actual practices myself. Yeah, so those sort of things I wouldn't be allowed to do.
And that's a really great, that really illustrates the point that the reason Steve doesn't undertake those things, and the reason they're out of the scope of his role, are but not because the tasks themselves are, not that he couldn't learn those tasks. Actually, you know, we can all learn how to suction someone. It's about the level of critical thinking required, and the level of depth and breadth of critical thinking that that means you have to be a certain level, or you have to have undertaken a certain level of academic learning and development to be able to undertake those tasks in practice. So we've got another question. Will the capabilities differ between different sectors of healthcare, the level of risk? Absolutely. So again, that outlines the issue of, it's not about lists of tasks and competencies. It is about the situation, the context, and the patient in front of you. So although perhaps capability in a practice doesn't differ, actually the scope of practice in different situations will change, and you might need in one scope. So for example, if you're a band 4 in mental health, actually your capability levels in communication might be much higher than somebody perhaps working in an MSK setting, for example. So the level of capability in the domains might change depending on what context you're working in. So we're going to just talk a little bit now about delegation. So when a registered, because this is another sort of big myth we need to debunk, when a registered physio delegates to a support worker, who's accountable and responsible for patient care? Registered physio, support worker, both. Fantastic. It's really great to hear you say that, because the absolute key around accountability, responsibility and delegation is that both the registered physio and the support worker have a duty of care to provide a reasonable standard of care to the patient. So we've got now some of you thinking the support worker, some of you thinking both. It is actually both. So this is the most misunderstood area of support worker practice, is accountability and delegation. So as a registered physiotherapist, the registered physiotherapist is accountable for their decision to delegate, so to allocate work to a support worker. So in order to delegate safely and appropriately and make that decision that this is okay to do, they've got to be clear about the scope of practice of the support worker, the role that they're working in, that is within their role, and that they are competent and confident with what they're doing. And that is going to obviously change between every support worker that anybody is working with. When the support worker accepts the delegation, they are then taking responsibility for carrying out what they've been asked to do safely and appropriately, and escalating if they need to. And they take accountability then for their actions and decisions after that. So what I've got here is quite a neat explanation of what that looks like in practice. So we've just got a scenario here with Carol delegating to Sean. So the process, and it's a process delegation, again, it's not a list, it's a process. So the process is that the activity that Carol is going to delegate, she knows that that's in the scope of Sean's role. She's following their department protocols about delegation. She also is following her own department protocols, because some departments will differ from what they feel is appropriate to delegate or not. This is the really critical bit. She knows that Sean's competent to undertake what she's delegated, and that his competencies are regularly reviewed as part of his ongoing supervision and support arrangements. And she knows that Sean knows how to contact her and what to report if needed. So then for Sean, he knows that the activity is in the scope of his role. He's clear that he's competent to undertake it, because he is absolutely certain that this is something he is trained and educated to do. He knows the limits of his competence. So he knows what he can do and what he shouldn't be doing. And he knows how to get hold of Carol if needed. If all of those things are ticked, it's safe and appropriate for Carol to delegate. It's safe and appropriate for Sean to accept it. Carol is accountable for her decision to delegate the activity, and Sean is accountable for accepting the activity, and then accountable for the treatment he provides and the decisions he makes after that. So the example I usually give in terms of making this crystal clear is that in this situation, if Carol said to Sean, Sean, can you finish off Mr. Shah's assessment? Can you issue him with any walking aids he needs? And then can you think about what services he might need for his ongoing care? Do you think he might need to see a social worker? Do you think he might need some reablement? Can you go and do that, Sean, and report back to me? And then what Sean does is goes to see Mr. Shah and strings him up by the ankles from a ceiling fan, and Mr. Shah breaks an arm in the process. Carol is not accountable for Mr. Shah's injury, Sean is. So that's just an extreme hypothetical example I use to just sort of show what we mean by who's accountable and when. Does that make sense, everybody? Is there anything in there that doesn't make sense that anybody wants me to just go over again? Because it's really, really important that you understand about accountability, and that you are a registered physio is not wholly accountable for everything that a support worker does. Because what happens when people believe that is they get terrified to delegate. We then get highly skilled, highly knowledgeable, competent people like Christy and Steve, who actually don't work at the top of their capability and top of their scope, and we don't get the best outcomes for patients because everybody's a bit too scared to delegate, because they think if I tell Christy to go and listen to someone's chest and she gets it wrong, and Christy wouldn't do that because she doesn't feel confident to do that, so it was a bad example. Steve, who does work in respiratory care, then and Steve does something wrong, then it's not about I can't remember what I said then as that example. Steve listens to someone's chest. Yes, I'm absolutely sure that he's competent to undertake that. So Kathy says it makes sense, but shows we must be sure about support worker skills before delegating. So what this should scream at you all is you need to work closely with the support staff that you work with. You need to get to know them. You need to be very clear about their capability and their competence so that you can delegate safely and appropriately. In my opinion, that is not stressed enough in induction. And there is not enough effort put in to ensuring that individuals spend time shadowing and working alongside their support workers so that they really understand their scope of practice. So Tyler's saying, is it the responsibility of the registered physiotherapist to check competencies? So you are accountable for knowing that that support worker is competent, Tyler, yes, but it may be that in a department you can be sure because you may have a training and development log, but it's about having a conversation, isn't it? Christy, Steve, would you agree with that? It's about having a conversation, isn't it?
Yeah, it's more about what we feel confident in doing. In our trust, we have a whole list of competencies that we need to do 2 or 3 times to show that we are competent in doing that particular task.
And then Hannah's put a really good question there. How do support workers feel is the best way to show the registered staff their competence? What do you think?
Well, from my point, basically, again, we have competencies, plus also we would work alongside the registered, especially our team leads, if they're actually on the unit as well, asking them if they could just watch over while we do something, and then they would give us feedback, and we would do that 2 or 3 times until they feel that we were quite competent in doing that particular procedure, situation, whatever the case would be.
I would say talk to us as well. That's the biggest thing. Just have a conversation with us and just see what we're comfortable and confident in doing.
Yeah. And the absolute thrust of tonight's webinar is about don't make assumptions. So this is what we're doing tonight, is all about busting these myths on what everybody believes is the scope of practice for support workers, what everybody believes competency is, so that you don't make assumptions. You don't make assumptions negatively, and you don't make assumptions about, oh, well, I'm sure they'll be okay doing this, so let's just ask them to do this. Don't make assumptions. Find out, understand capability, understand level of practice. We've got all of the resources on the CSP website that you can look at that. Don't make assumptions, speak to your support workers. So this leads us really nicely onto the last little bit that I want to go through here. Okay, I've just got a little scenario here for you. I'm conscious we're starting to run out of time. There's so much to talk to you about. Little scenario. Here's a physio. He's talking to a patient, and he's deciding that the rest of this patient's care now can be delegated to a support worker. And he says to the patient, you're doing really well, so now I'm going to ask my unskilled, unqualified, untrained colleague to come and see you. So would anyone ever say that to a patient, and how on earth might that patient feel? So this is a real mind your language. You've heard from Steve and Christy, the support workforce, they are not registered physiotherapists, but they are not unqualified. They're not registered physiotherapists, but they are not untrained. They're not registered physiotherapists, but they are not unskilled. There is nothing about what is it legal or illegal to do. There is nothing about what is it that they are allowed or not allowed to do. There are some things that are illegal to delegate, but they're very few. They're delivery of a baby, certification of death, and prescription of medicines. But there's a whole myth about legal and illegal and allowed and not allowed. And really, to put this in perspective for you, and this is a genuine fact, 60% of hands-on patient care is provided by support workers. So our support workforce deserve our utmost respect, our utmost attention to their support, their development, and how we can work best with them. Please don't ever call them unqualified, untrained, or unskilled. Okay, so here's the last bit now. We're going to ask you in a minute to challenge yourself. So after this hour, which seems to have whizzed by, and what you know now, I want you to share with us a bit of a pledge, really. How will you now think differently about the support workforce? And actually, more importantly, what will you do differently now? And that might be just, you know what, I'm going to be really careful never to talk about individuals as untrained, unskilled, unqualified. And you will hear it in practice from registered physiotherapist colleagues all the time, that language, and to really crystallize that while you think of what are you going to pledge to do differently or think differently. I'm going to ask Steve and Christy, can you share a personal experience where you have not felt valued and recognized for your experience, your skill, your knowledge, your capability in your roles, just to give everybody a flavour of the impact it has when we get this wrong in practice?
Yeah, mine was the other week. It wasn't with a physio, it was with an OT. But we were sitting having a chat because our Band 6 occupational therapist has got a fantastic opportunity to go to Patworth and learn how to set up a new IT bit over there. And we were discussing, because she was leaving, that would leave our team with no qualified OTs. And I was trying to explain to her that, you know, it would be okay in some cases because I can do kitchen assessments, I can do access visits, I can do home visits, I can do washing assessments, and she asked me what do I need a degree for then. And that made me feel, well, for starters, I was absolutely gobsmacked, and I was just wondering, you know, haven't got the bigger picture. You can't see why you've got the degree and I haven't, for starters. But, you know, the fact that she couldn't see that she was doing the more complex patients. That's why she's got the knowledge and the skills. And I just, you know, yeah, it didn't make me feel great.
Yeah, from my point, again, it was from a OT situation and also rotational band 5s. Obviously, as I said earlier, you know, there's quite a few times that I've run the ward, and especially during COVID, very much so. And then suddenly, when things start to calm down, the rotational band 5s come back in, and OTs, and they actually don't know my background, what I do, what I've done. And I literally feel that sometimes that I'm pushed to the side. You know, I have a knowledge in tutoring, I'm a tutor, you know, and so I try and teach as well as do. And yeah, they just don't have an understanding of the skill base that I have been portraying throughout 3 months, or if you like, throughout 2 years since being on the unit. And it's very degrading. You know, I always take time to know the team that I work with as well and know their skill bases and so on. And I just feel that sometimes that would be nice to have that reciprocated. Yeah.
Thank you, Steve. So just again, we've had a couple come in. Kathy's saying, I'll absolutely listen and learn, respect their experience. Amanda's saying, an incredible resource of information and skills to collaborate with. Her pledge is to communicate effectively and respectfully. Brilliant. Tyler's saying, I pledge to have even more conversations with my colleagues so I can better understand the scope of their roles in different scenarios. Encourage as much autonomy as their competencies allow. Brilliant. Because you know what? When you enable autonomy as much as competencies and scope of practice allows, it's patients that benefit. It is patients that benefit. You saw Paula in the video saying, you know, it's because of the capability of support workers, they were able to see patients 3 times a day instead of just once a day. And that has an amazing outcome for patients. Thought excellent colleagues, bettering patient outcomes, improving knowledge base. We're a bit preaching to the converted here, aren't we, people? I cannot believe some people would talk to you like that. You're irreplaceable. But, you know, the sad fact is that is how our support workforce are talked about. And you know what? If just 23 of you come off this call tonight and change your language or actually challenge your colleagues in practice and the way they speak, then we're starting to chip away at that iceberg, aren't we, people? That's our aim in our group. Add the role of support workers to our student education sessions. Hooray! So if anyone's read Frontline, and I've written a bit about the invaluable role of the support workforce in student placement education. those of you on the call that are students, a core proficiency in your standards of proficiencies is that you can safely and effectively delegate. And as we've shown tonight, you cannot do that if you don't understand the role of the support workforce and work to understand what that is, and work to understand the level of capability and the amazing knowledge and skill that is at your fingertips. And the support workforce have got a part to play in this as well. So if you say, would you talk to me about that amazing communication you just did with that patient's family? I'd like to understand how you thought through that. And that's a really good example of where you can really learn from a support worker in practice. And they say, oh, you can't learn anything from me, I'm just a support worker. Because colleagues do say that, Christy and Steve, don't they? Challenge them on that. Say, no, actually, you're not just a support worker. You are somebody that I've just seen with amazing skill. Can you share a bit of that with me? And it's only through those challenges and thinking about what we say and what we do in practice that will start to change some of this culture. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us tonight, and a huge thank you to Steve and Christy. Fantastic, great to have you. It's far more powerful than me rabbiting on my favourite topic for an hour or so.